So what I would like to share with you tonight, is how this incredible Marlene Dumas exhibition is, I would say, transfiguring what we usually call figuration. And figuration generally is always structured in a series of binaries, such as figuration, abstraction, or figuration, non-figuration, or even figuration, disfiguration. And there's a lot of disfiguration in Marlene Dumas too, but for me, these binaries are too straight. They're kind of inoperative to encapsulate this incredible intensity of each and every Marlene Dumas paintings and works on paper in the show. And I would like to try to understand how Marlene Dumas kind of gets into what French philosopher Gilles Deleuze calls the intensive fact of the body. And what he means there is to try to understand the passage of the drama, of the dramatic register, the tragic event, to that of the pictorial intensity, properly speaking, to the intensity of the painting, of the gestures, of the chemical processes of painting, which is manifested in and on the skin, the surface, the matters that matters so much in Marlene Dumas' paintings, and the many times that it convokes. Caroline Bourgeois, who is the curator of the show with Marlene Dumas, called this pictorial intensity a risk. So we're going to talk about risk tonight, about risking, that Marlene Dumas is so much delving into. It means that she's a painter that never chooses for her work some kind of a solution, a good solution, a balanced solution, a straight solution, an obvious solution, a right solution. But what happens in her work is each time she undermines this balance, she undermines the solution, I would say in a kind of left-handed, unbalanced, maybe a bit drunk and irresolute gesture that leaves us never at peace. So what I want to go to with you, I hope, is to understand the world of Marlene Dumas as a kind of haunting. The paintings, for me, that's what I'm trying to develop, are haunted, and in reverse, we are haunted by the painting. That's my plan, okay? Yeah? You follow me? Good. So let's begin. So often they arrive from behind. Sometimes they seem to return, and then they offer their posterior side, their bottoms, their asses, their genitals sometimes. They also can be seen in profile, such as in direction, the man that looks at his erection, or legs upside down, such as in Turkish Girl, who looks at us while showing her genitals. That's the beginning of the show. Hope you've seen it, because it sort of is this incredibly forceful moment after this one, after a few moments, where you begin to see the works of Marlene Dumas in the first room. So it doesn't stop the kind of frontality of our encounter and their presence. This frontality is exacerbated by the very many changes of format of the works that can be immense or very, very, very small. And that sometimes they dominate us totally. And it's again a way of announcing their presence, such as in this painting, Birth. You don't see the scale, but we look at it, from, it's really above us. Huh? So in Birth, legs squeezed together, belly eminently prominent, arms raised in a gesture of welcoming and of distance. So we're not waiting for them. They're waiting for you in the palazzo. You meet them in this kind of suspension between apparition and a kind of disappearing. In that open-end space and open-end time that this exhibition proposes. The title of the show is Open-End, and with this idea of open-ended, you can actually feel the way the space and the time are disorganized in a way. So when you come to meet the figures, this process has kind of led you to the heart of an in-between, a space in between, a time in between. Let's call it a liminal time. It's a term that has been coined by an anthropologist called Victor Turner, who defines the liminal as a space in which people play, I'm quoting him, with the elements of the familiar and defamiliarize them. There is this element of recognition and this element of defamiliarization that you're living with. It's in a space that's in between. It's a space where you recognize things, but you don't quite recognize them. And then you feel not as familiar as you should be. So let's face another example. So you have, under the title awkward, again, a kind of liminal word, you meet a blue couple. Their gender is quite indistinct. They're in profile for us, but they're face to face. And they're holding hands, and they also have their feet entangled. Maybe you're all like me and you have exactly the same memory of childhood where where you put your feet on the feet of your parents. I did that with my father, and your father makes the work, he goes forth and goes back, and you have your feet on the top of your father's, of your mother's, or your mother and your mother's, or your father and your father's feet. And then I see that here. It's a very familiar gesture, kind of, something that goes back to childhood. And so you see that mark of intimacy, and then you see another mark of intimacy that I actually made a detail of, which is the hands. And suddenly, when you look closely, it's more likely that the entanglement of the hands conceals something that can be very sexual, isn't it? Between the two, there is this very sexual gesture, there is this very familiar gesture of the feet, and then there's space between the two. You see that space. There's a kind of, again, vertical space between the two. So that reinforces, to me at least, the impression that this posture between maintaining a kind of distance to see each other maybe, and pressing against one another, is in a process of transformation. So it is becoming statified. It's becoming something that stays. In that very paradoxical exercise of the liquidity of the paint, there is something that is maintained at a distance and maintained in that distanced position. Now, here, when you see this small work called The Gate, You might also notice this kind of very strange painted space between the legs of the person. And between the thighs of the person, you have this enormous thrust of paint, which is very vertiginous, because suddenly the negative space becomes a kind of extremely positive space. And, you know, in the catalogue I said it was like a fist fucking of painting, and I do believe it's something like that. Where is the figure? Where is the background? Again, Victor Turner, the anthropologist I was talking to you about, qualifies these daring microspaces as a kind of social limbo in which the ordinary course of life is suspended. The ordinary course of anatomy here is also suspended. So, when you're unconstrained by existing norms, they thus allow us for the renegotiation of identities, sliding them in a kind of non-binary indeterminacy. It is not for nothing, to my sense, that this kiss opens the show and lures you into its intimacies. Indeterminacy hesitates between the visual and the tactile. The visual and the tactiles are also two words that actually assess the distance, enabling the exchange of gazes, the visual, and the empathy that presides at the nearing of mouths, of teeth, of tongues, of sexes, of membranes, of fluids. It is the habitat of a desire, just like the figures are inhabited by it. Art historian Georges Didier Huberman has a word for it. He calls it the space of feeling. If, as he says, all feeling is a movement that carries us ceaselessly between contact and distance. It also shelters a time, a temporality that the figures devise. They seem to be kissing forever. And while we're talking about cinema, a lot of you might be too young to have admired the long, I think it's 45 seconds, it's more than a minute maybe, kiss between actor Eva Marie Saint and actor Cary Grant in Hitchcock's North by Northwest. You know, it's an enormous, very, very, very long kiss. You might also think about a film by Andy Warhol, which is called Kiss, and it's just a film of a kiss. And here, time expands exactly the same way, a kind of an incredible expansion of intimacy also. In their way, the tongues exchange, insinuating themselves in an enduring kiss. There is a kind of language spoken, and here the kiss is the kiss of painting, a kiss of painting that actually stains the teeth and absorbs all colors. That also is an experience you might have, you know, when you kiss someone and you have lipstick. You know, your teeth are stained, maybe your mouth is expanding as a clown's mouth, and this is something I think that Marlene encapsulates so well. The fact that suddenly, you know, exactly the perfection of makeup, you know, is totally blurred by something that has happened within the painting. So we are thinking about liminality, about proximity and distance, the visual and the tactile. And we have been seeing only figures alone or figures in couples and figures that are kissing, but there are also figures in groups, and there are also these very particular groupings that you can see, for instance, in the grouping of these women and this frog in Betrayal, a work of 1994, which is a series of faces. So that's a group in a way. Huh? That's a group in which the figures, the faces are alone and together at the same time. That's what the series are about. Huh? So that proximity, the proximity of these faces and the distance between these faces also reign in their cohabitation. Or you will see that also in the series of queer portraits of gay men on the floor above the one where these women are displayed. Again, their loneliness is stress, but also the fact that they belong to a same class, to a same gender, to a same sexual proclivity. Again, this idea that being together, being grouped, is also a figure for being alone and lonely. Distance, proximity, proximity, distance. So, what I would like to stress also is the very, very striking way the figure figures in the painting. They're kind of defamiliarized again, very paradoxically, because we don't understand at all their context. In fact, we see very rarely their context. There is nothing that can actually describe where they are or when they are. We can see perfectly, oh well, not so perfectly. We can see them, their body, but we don't see so much where they are, where the body is. So again, what generally separates proximity again and distance, what is near, very near, skin near, and what is far is not shown. Huh? That's what the paint endures again. So the figures, they cannot particularize for you the here in which they stand, they lie down. They have absolutely no horizon, no determinate points of spatial reference. They have no day, they're generally at night. They have no shadow by which you can constitute it. Yeah? Maybe there's one, I'm thinking about one particular work in the show, which is called indeed Horizon. It's called Einder Horizon. And it shows a large kind of display of flowers sort of floating in a kind of dark blue, all shades of blue, green stream, which Marlene explains is her mother's grave. But even that painting that is called Horizon, the horizon of the grave, the horizon of death, maybe, but it's in a kind of crepuscule, it's in a kind of night. One would maybe has to know that Marlene works at night. The works are also in the night, in their night, in the blurry immersion of their environment from which they cannot detach. This space and this time amalgamate a kind of compass for bodies that are less the product of anatomy and physiology than the theater of chemical operations, those of an intense, liquid, viscous, mutating, seductive, heterogeneous pictorial matter. So the night of the painting is, one could call what sticks to them, and what changed them, what transformed them, their life and their afterlife, is that matter. It's what matters in the painting. So this liquid approach to matter, of course, has an environment here, which is Venice. But it should be here reversed to the way the paintings are made, to the way the paintings belong to their own night. So here you have the the eyes almost close of the intoxicated person. But you have also the eyes wide open with their incredible light in their night of Marlene's brother. The painting, it's called the Baba. And it's one of the most incredible figuration of eyes that actually stand in the show. There's a lot of eyes in the show. To me, the eyes, such as this one, and by the way, this one, she says in that little guide, comes from an advertisement for eyeshadow. You know, it comes from, you know, very anodyne picture that she found. And she made this crazy eye that reminds her of the film you're going to see later, Le Chien Andalou, in which, you know, it means, as she says in the little leaflet, after the Chien Andalou, the film that you might going to see afterwards, no image of an eye feels safe. So the eyes is also this duskiness, this crepuscule, this night of the painting. And it is also for me a mode of memory of what comes back. And I cannot but think of another person, a writer, who has the same initials as Marlene Dumas, and her name is Marguerite Duras, and she's this very famous French writer. Her entire oeuvre moves in the remembrance, in the memory and the remembrance of what she called the colossal brothel of Indochina, colonial Indochina, and the submission to the right forces of hundreds of millions of individuals. These are the terms of Marguerite Duras, but they're not unrelated to the work of Marlene Dumas and her relation to the apartheid in South Africa, where she was born. So both Marguerite Duras as a writer and Marlene Dumas as a painter make use of reiteration, memory, and kind of rehashing something which is the madness of seeing and seeing and seeing again, which by this repetition of seeing becomes some kind of déjà vu. Personally, you know, I'm absolutely obsessed by a book of Marguerite Duras, I cannot pronounce it, which is called Le Ravissement de l'Olvestein. And it's about a woman who is totally obsessed. Actually, she becomes she becomes inhabited by a kind of delirium of a ghost scene, of a haunting scene, of a scene that encapsulates for us what seeing is about. And it's about desire, and it's about separation, it's about proximity, and it's about people that, you know, she will never see again, she will separate from. So it's about this incredible obsession, I would say. And the obsession is that, you know, it's that young woman, it's a young girl, and she was going to marry a man she loved and who loved her, and this man becomes totally obsessed by another woman, Anne-Marie Streeter, and what Lolvestein is obsessed about, totally obsessed about, is seeing the couple dancing. And it's a book about this obsession of seeing, of desire, and of death, of knowing that her love, her desire is also dead to them. So I think that the same thing is to be seen in Marlene Dumas' work, where you have so many kisses and so many separations, where you have the languor of love, you have the voracity of sex, you have inebriation, intoxication that actually undoes the outlines, and you also have the lament of a grieving mother whose tears dissolve the folds of a shroud enveloping a lifeless body. Desire and separation. Here, what is absolutely incredible is how the way Marlene Dumas, renders or remakes or reincarnates this incredible Pietà Rondadini by Michelangelo. And I showed you here because we had the pleasure to visit it before it was changed. For years and years and years, it was displayed in the Palazzo Sforza in Milano in this incredible display, which was very simple, but was also a way to develop the notion of time, of grief, of looking, of seeing. It was something that, it was a separation and a proximity at the same time from the Michelangelo. And this is something I told you that I'm also reiterating, many things I've already been saying to you. Again, I'm saying it again, this idea of incredible proximity that you want to actually eat the painting, and this incredible distance also, this liminality that Marlene Dumas always showing us. So, in many of the works in the show, you can see something which is repeating another work, repeating something else. Well, this is something that actually, this idea, is something that I think is the mood of the whole show. The fact that the show shows us, and that's also the intensity of it, the pictorial intensity, is that if the figures, if the paintings return and return and return and return to us, is that they already have been there once. Maybe they haven't been at the Palazzo Grassi, it's their first show, but it is true that there is this impression of all the works, the way they appear, that they already have been there. And it's true that maybe they already have been here, maybe not as paintings either, but rather as images. Indeed, Marlene Dumas belongs to that. She was born in 1953 and belongs to a generation of artists that came of age in the early 80s, late 70s, early late 80s, and it was called by the brilliant American critic Douglas Crimp. It was called, the artists were actually reunited by him the first time in an exhibition called Pictures in 1978. And it showed the way artists of that generation made use of existing images, images from the media, images from the television, images from the screen, photographic images that they had and archives that they had already found and that they were replicating in their works. These artists were called Cindy Sherman, Sherry Levine, Louise Lawler, Richard Prince. All these artists, well, Louise Lawler is in the Biennale, and you might be interested in seeing how she continues to use already existing works and already existing displays in her photographic work. And Marlene Dumas makes no exception to that picture generation. She uses photography as a kind of basis for her paintings. But I was very surprised when I had the chance to meet Marlene Dumas. By the way, her references are never exactly the references one can imagine. For instance, okay, we have Red Moon here on the left. Huh? So this is the image that she uses for Red Moon. So you can see the difference. It's the image, a Polaroid that she actually took in a strip club called Casa Rosso in Amsterdam, where she lives in the Netherlands. So you see the process of repeating, of replication, is also it's a process that I would call memorizing, trying to remember, but also trying to invent using imagination. That's very important. French writer Monique Wittig said something very important to me at last. She said, try to remember, try to remember, try to remember, but if you can't, imagine, invent. And I think it's very beautiful to make an equivalent between the two processes. Not to make fake news, not at all, but try to use your own powers of memory and imagination at the same time. No hierarchy between the two. So this is what Marlene Dumas has showed me, at least, as a kind of model for that work. So this work, you would say, oh, it's an Ophelia. It's one of those, pre-Raphaelite English painted women who actually, drowns in the river. Not at all. Maybe it empowers this kind of drowning women with a kind of life. Huh? Another example. So it's that's incredible painting called Magdalena, Out of Eggs, Out of Business, 1995. So, the trope of the Magdalena, the trope of the fallen woman, actually rises vertically. Again, no background, no horizon as a background. The background, she emerges, she kind of floats and emerges from a very dark brown background, from which her body, just as dark, only surfaces through the witchcraft of a gray head of hair, loosely applied on the white reserve of the canvas, and that falls to the knees, accentuating, the becoming rough and rare and gray and ugly with the old age. So you think about Donatello, which actually is a show which is now in Berlin and was in Florence not so long ago. You think of this work of Donatello, you say that you see the same hair, you think it's her. Not at all. This is what Marlene Dumas shared with me, as examples that were used for the Magdalena. So you see again, try to remember, and if you can't, invent. That is really, for me, really interesting, because first of all, this is what Marlene says, the use of photography for her paintings instead of, naked living persons, for instance, or models in real life, for instance, or people she knows. She also paints people she knows. But the reason for her painting through photographies is painting is anything without asking the permission or negotiating with the original subject that has been photographed. Because our model, that is, our all photography, has become public property. We do not have to be where the scene is taking place. We do not have to ask permission, she says. But this is part of the tension of a good artwork, that one cares and at the same time does not really care. Yeah? I think it's really important. So these figures, if they come back, if they recur, if they are memory from photographies and invention from photography, if they emerge in that kind of no background, we could call them afterlife figures, according to the notion of Nachleben advanced by the art historian Abby Warburg. So let me explain, First of all, philosopher or essayist or writer Walter Benjamin has reminded us that once the image is produced, once the image is done, once the image is painted out of the studio, for instance, it has a life. And this life is very important. But Abby Warburg, with this notion of Nachleben, goes a little further, meaning that it's also what happens after the production of that image, and also that the image is surviving. So there are the two notions, this projection into a kind of future, the afterlife, what happens after the image is made. What happens, it is changed, it is broken, it is fragmented, it is used, it goes somewhere, it is used by another group of people, it is used to other means, etc. That's the afterlife. But then also the idea that, there's a little light of survival that goes through goes through time and arrives to us. I added this work, it's a detail of a work, because that's what an afterlife can be. And that's also what this incredible Belgian, actually, philosopher and anthropologist, Vinciane Després, who has written a very, very beautiful book called Au bonheur des morts, to the happiness of the dead. She thinks that we shouldn't grieve the dead, we shouldn't, expulse or exit the dead by grieving them, because we are surrounded by dead figures, and they're always there, and they recur, and they're like ghosts, and they live with us. They live with us. This is what, for me, the image, and what Marlene Dumas makes us feel and think. But it's through paint. The image is a burden, as she says, the paintings have left the shores of the imagery of photography, of the iconography of photography. It is a burden. It is a body deserted by painting. Just as here, the skin, the flesh of the mother face appears both kind of phosphorescent and indistinct to the sentenced prisoner. That's the title. It is a kind of negative space, it is a negative figure, it is a kind of ghost in which the figure, a moment in which the figure appear and present themselves, and I receive by gaze, my gaze, your gaze. So, in French, to kind of characterize the word, the one that receives these figures, we have the word regarder. And to me, it has always been an incredible verb, because regarder means to see, but also to see again, but also to conserve, to retain, to preserve. So it has, when you look, in French, when your gaze is in contact, in proximity and distance with a painting, with someone, you are already doing it twice. Regarder, doing it again. And you're seeing, and you are re-seeing, and you're re-seeing again, and you are keeping. You are seeing and you're keeping. And to me, that's what happens to us in front of these figures. And that also what happens to these figures, and that's where they gain a kind of intensity. This incredible intensity is made by the painted skin, is made by their thickness, the thickness of that redoubling and redoubling and redoubling, maintaining and keeping and preserving intensity. So what is also very, very interesting, I think, and that the shows so well. I was telling you that the works have no space and no time that's particular. Well, sort of. Some of them have, but most of them don't. You cannot see the here and the when they are. They could be, a long time ago. They can be now. They are now because they were a long time ago. So what is really interesting to me is that it seems for a lot of painting that the space around the figure is not very important, or at least that you can cut the space around the picture. And the space is made for the figure. The space and the time is made for them. It's their time, it's their space, it's their kind of immobility. Here you have the figure without Picasso, without maybe it's what is characterized here. So it's true that the space in which the paintings are, the time in which the paintings are, somewhat reminds us of the shroud, the tomb, the naked body, the naked corpse. Yeah? And indeed, Marlene Dumas has very often, or several times at least, taken up the narrow horizontality of the naked corpse at works, for instance, in Hans Holbein the Younger, The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb. That is a painting of 1522. This painting challenged, by the way, the taboo cast upon the visibility of what takes place in the sepulchre, where the body of Christ after death was to remain hidden from the eyes and the imagination of believers. And what is really striking in this painting is that it's as if the painting itself shows that the body is enduring, is continuing to be corroded into death. Okay, so the negotiation of visibility and invisibility always raises ethical questions. And, showing one's ass, presenting one's pussy, legs raised. For me, this work, Turkish Girl, was really very much in contact with a series we watched on the internet called P-Valley. And it's the story of a strip club, a place where actually women are pole dance. They pole dance in a club in Mississippi, and it's a series. Please see it. It's really incredible because the way these women's body is presented and represented, in a kind of empowering way, but also not hiding anything of the job they do, which is that they pole dance, they strip, they are sex workers for many of them, and the fact that they all belong to the African American mind. Most of them are African American, are black. It's really something that also empowers the way this film is actually, this series is actually made, and episode after episode, there is this dressing up of these actresses, of these models, into an incredible array of colors, an incredible array of lights, an incredible array of sceneries, like the paintings of Marlene Dumas. The way the skin, the painting, the way the processes, the gestures, the fluidity of the paintings empowers something, intensifies something. Well, in the P-Valley series, there is a kind of the same process at works. So, this is exactly the contrary, for instance, of academic painting, of course, where you have the kind of nymph holding the source, and her body is entirely naked, and she holds this bottle, this jar of whatever liquid. Here, it's a kind of crazy nymph. She's gotten totally crazy. She has her dress raised and her panties down, and she sarcastically spills a bottle of something on her sex while touching herself. She jiggles and she claims agency while keeping the meaning of her posture to herself. So there is both, same thing, again, the kind of empowerment that the pose, the pole and the pose of this woman is giving her. Power relations between the viewer and the viewed are therefore a really crucial point in Marlene Dumas' work, and they play itself out in the pictorial return of the figures. You have, for instance, hierarchy here, which is, of course, taken from the film The Empire of the Senses. So her nudity is armed with really black contours, and she's surfacing from a screen of dark oil, and the feminine figure who is straddling a man reduced to a head, seems to be looking twice, emptied of pupils and irises, the black rings of her eyes, leaned over her lover, that she's going to kill in The Empire of the Senses, actually emasculate, and darting at you as well, who is observing you know. Again, the play of visibility, of invisibility, is always something that has to do with ethics. So the relations of the gazes continues even when they turn their backs, or even when the figures have banded eyes, are blindfolded, are hooded, are stripped of a gaze into and after their execution, testifying to the fact that they have lost a face. The necro-political regime, which is empowered to distribute life and death, also knows to deprive its prisoners and its tortured of a right to see, of a right to inspection. So the painter is that pallid child with a serious, vaguely wrathful face. Her little, what is really incredible, her little stomach is smeared with blue, and her hands are painted in red up to the wrist on one side and pearlish on the other. It's done, it's painted. The fact that there is these blue marks and these red marks attest to this. So the painting is painted. The painting of the painter is painted. And the painter has dangling arms, like the Watteau's Gilles, which is now called Pierrot at the Louvre. You know, his arms are inert the same way. It's done. The war is done. He's doing nothing. And this idleness is distributed throughout the painting, since it recounts nothing. So it is, historian Arlette Farge likens the dangling arms of the Gilles to the condition of the soldier, demobilized after war, a gesture of after war, a disoriented gesture in terms of history. Gilles is tired, maybe the painter is tired. There are a presence of an absence. There are a painted ghost. They have returned to blur the borders between the fixed and the inanimate. Yet the child is also a little old person with several thin strands of cindered hair on her bald brow. But above all, in a kind of precarity of the painted matter, the painted matter is bare to the point of leaving the trace of the contours having served its conception. The figure touches both upon apparition and disappearance. So here, it's true that we were saying at the beginning, you know, that the drama of the figure, the drama of the event is collapsed into the intensity of the paint. It's not the pathos of the figures that interest us, neither the actions probably, nor their locations that we don't know, but the liquid material life of the paint, the skin of the surfaces, as Marlene Dumas says. The whole affective charge is expressed there. The whole emotional moment of the burning, the reddening, the bluing, the freezing of the bluing, the adolescent greenery of the deliquescent old age is like a theater of textures. Like stains examined under a microscope, the traces of liquid pigments, the ink running on the paper held upright or stirred horizontally, seem to disperse or assemble in stains, in bubbles, in streaks, in globules, in tears, in efflorescence. around the tuft of hair of the domed pubis serving as a motif or landscape for an entire painting, flutters a cloud of droplets or washed, almost transparent matter. And I see that I don't have much time, so I would like to end with this work, which is the dead Marlene. It's, and I'm trying to find my paper, which is probably there. So nothing is more speaking to me than the dead Marlene. Again, a question of ethics, of visibility. The journalist Anthony Summers found the photograph of Marilyn Monroe taken at the morgue after she was dead, and he actually published it in 1985. The title of this journalist that the journalist opposed was Marilyn in Death, and not Dead Marilyn. That's Marlene Dumas' title. So Marilyn Monroe appears after the photograph in death as a bruised corpse, which allowed many people to think that, to presuppose that she had undergone an autopsy, but also if she had undergone an autopsy, it was because there was a kind of supposition that she could have been murdered. So there was a kind of necessity, at least for the authorities, of a kind of forensic butchery. The choice of paints, the use of the paint itself by Marlene Dumas places the emphasis on the stains, the decrepit, the corroded aspect of the corpse. Marlene Dumas said that to her the choice of a dead Marilyn was linked to the death of her own mother. As well, she was going to show it in America, and it was for her also the political moment following the death of the American dream that Marilyn's death also represents. So the pictorial gestures produce indeed a palimpsest of painting, and you'll notice here how the tracing of the hair by the paintbrush recalls the insistence of Marilyn Monroe, the star, to always present herself with her hair perfectly dyed in platinum blonde. And so there is this kind of, this obsessive action of the hairbrush that recalls the obsessive action of the comb in the hair. And so it's as if the painting itself was kind of taking care of the destituted body. So the sociologist Avery Gordon described in her book called Ghostly Matters, haunting at raising specters and altering the experience of being in time the way we separated the past, the present, and the future. I'm quoting Avery Gordon. These specters, or ghosts, appear when the trouble they represent and symptomize is no longer being contained or repressed or blocked from the view, when the people who are meant to be invisible show up without any sign of leaving, when disturbed feelings cannot be put away, when something else, something different from before, seems like it must be done. So there are processes of great violence that have suspended lives, rendering them impossible to be thought of and to be said by the annulment of their traces. These eradications have encompassed the marks of the very disappearance of hundreds of thousands, even millions of kidnapped, tortured, murdered individuals in Ukraine, in Chile in the 70s, in Argentina, in South Africa, where Marlene comes from, in Russia, in Kosovo, in all occupied, colonized country, in slavery, in the apartheid. The psychiatrist and essayist Frantz Fanon analyzed the lived experience of the black man, haunted by a non-existence and a death that is continually re-articulated by the simple presence of the black body, a knowledge transmitted from generation to generation through the body. So, to me, for those suspended subjectivities, Marlene Dumas' paintings renders reapparition possible. In each of the figures that were disfigured by the colonial empires for reasons of race, gender, age, sexual dissidence, health, or culture, you seek less a figuration than a spectral seismography. They are revenants, and they are assembled in couples, in series, in families, in neighborhoods, testifying also to a phobic organization of repression and culpability, striking not only the individuals, but also their parents, their children, their lovers, their friends, their sympathizers. For instance, in the show, there is Oscar Wilde and his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. There is Pier Paolo Pasolini and his mother, and Anna Magnani. There is also, here, Mohammed El-Katrani, Jean Genet's lover, Abdallah Bentaga, Jean Genet's also Jean Genet's lover. They're both lovers of Jean Genet, who is represented. And then you have also the 46 great men, homosexuals, gay men actually, of the 19th and 20th century. And when she pays homage to when Marlene Dumas pays homage to the French poet Charles Baudelaire, his companion Jeanne Duval is there, his translator Hafid Bouazza, his poem Le désespoir de la vieille, his poem Le joujou du pauvre here, and perhaps also the rat that figures in the poem. So these are also ways of telling stories that totally break with the usage that distributes agency among fully active subjects and inert objects. Painting offers no resurrection, but rather a lunar time toward and beyond a horizon that requires a particular kind of perception where the transparent and the shadowy confront each other. This is from French 18th century philosopher and art critic Denis Diderot, but it also could be from Avery Gordon that I quoted. So this is what Marlene Dumas paints. She brings about a kind of displacement, not like the one made by the genius grand male artist, the one that Diderot was talking about, that makes in endowing life to his models. He's kind of giving birth. That's the genius painter, male painter, white painter, Western painter. Much on the contrary, she brings about a displacement that grants the shadowy, the shades, the dryness, the pustules, the powder, the ashes, the smoke, the liquidity, thereby displacing in that theater of textures what makes history's painting. You've understood that my whole thing was to say that what Marlene Dumas is confronting herself to what make history in a painting. And of course, there's the content, there's the theme of every part of the show, which is of course relating to historical matters. But that doesn't matter to me, at least. That doesn't matter to me, because what Marlene Dumas has brought about to the history of painting and to painting now, is to make the matter of painting history, to make all the blurs, the liquidities, the dryness, the pustules, the erosion, all the life of painting. That is what makes history for her. And I really thank her for that, because it's a major displacement for me in the history of art. And I thank her, and I thank you for, bearing to my very, very, very long conference. Voilà. I wanted to have a whole discussion with you, if you've seen the show and what works you've liked and what would you feel about them.
There is two paintings between the series of painting. That one is as a bride,
Yes.
full clothes, is the only one
Yes,
that's not
yes,
naked.
yes.
And the other one with the bathing suit.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
It's not the
the-
bathing suit, it's her panties.
Yeah, I'm not a specialist, and
Yeah.
so it's the what's the meaning of it? And the second question is, like, as you said, maybe in the history how she tried to follow the traditional painting is not the matter, but this is the most thing is matter for me. But I didn't understand how she did it. Actually, I show it. If you can point it again, how she showed that.
Huh.
Merci.
Do you know the paintings? You know, again, there are these very oblong, there's very vertical formats, and one is on the left, and one, you know, there are two kind of, one is there and one is there, yes, and one is a woman and her panties are down, and she has this kind of dangling little coiffure, and the other one is a woman with a kind of bride, and she really looks like a skeleton, you know, under the many, yes, she really looks. So for me, you know, what I was trying, that's exactly for me the, you know, I'm not explaining the meaning because everybody is inventing their own meaning to the works. Thankfully, you know, I'm not a guide. You know, you have your own ways of interpreting, and it's so. What do they mean to you? Yes.
Okay, if you want me to answer, there are two different promises. One is the promises to social, like wearing like bathing suit in public, and the other one is like a marriage I'm promising to another man.
So what do you make of that?
She wanted to be naked, but those things is important for her. Maybe I don't know.
So it's interesting because you're articulating the two works together as a kind of contradiction between, you know, a desire for power, a desire for the power of her own body, and a veiling of the body that is indeed imposed on her by the social. Well, that's a very good interpretation, I think, you know. So, you know, that's why I'm kind of, I don't want to make any interpretation of you know, what they mean. That's why I'm displacing it to the way, you know, they look like really like phantoms, like specters, and they're haunting us. You are haunted by these two pictures and their articulation and their opposition, you know. And I think that's how, indeed, you know, what I was saying, she makes history, you know. Of course, it's what is depicted is very important, but with the what is depicted, there is also this spectral quality, the fact that it comes to us and that it meets us, and that is, it's also a way to make history, to make us come, to make the figures come again to us, you know, as a kind of reminder of something, you know, and you don't know what, you don't know exactly what it means, but you understand that, you know, there is this kind of emerging, this kind of appearing and disappearance.
Does she try to, by plan, paint it, or she see what she see in the painting and she mark it? That's why they come very much fluidity in my point of view, and you know, this blurriness, that you use a flash, color as a flash, and then you use your imagination to find out what you see. And then that's why you cannot call it private, and actually you can call it collective consciousness, because what is it? It means everyone something. But for sure it came out of my head then too.
Thank you very much for the great lecture. I would maybe like to add something to what was just said. This question of like what is our private imagination and what would be the collective consciousness, because I got like something you said towards the end got stuck in my thoughts. You said, if I understood that right, that the painting itself is not alive, it's not carrying life, but it's rather like, yeah, living in a sort of like a in between, like a subliminal space in between. And I was asking myself, what is this subliminal space? Is it, if I go back to Warburg, who you mentioned earlier, he had this idea of a Denkraum, of like a sort of like a collective imaginary, or do you rather see the spectres as do they really have their own space, or is there space in between us in this kind of like space that you showed in the beginning between the couple, you know, like a in-between space? How could you describe this space where the spectres live?
Well, again, you know, it's a space that they make, obviously. It's a space that they make. It's a time that they make. It's obvious because the way, I mean, to me, I don't know if I have an interpretation, or Marlene Dumas makes them for them. But the fact that the canvas, you know, sort of the body and the relation to the material, the materiality of the canvas, you know, the canvas is very, very often shaped really around the body. Yeah? So again, to go back to your remark, it's a constraint, but also it's a kind of individualization of a body, of its own space. So it is in between. Again, if I understand what you're saying, between the private and the public, you know, between the social constraint and the personal constraint, there is something that she tries to make. Because it's not true that, you know, the constraint it's always on the, you know, the social, and that we are devoid of constraints. Of course, the constraints are also embodied in us, and of course we live them. So I think that's maybe, you know, that the space they live in, you know, the space of desire and of constraints, and it's all around them. It's like a halo in a way. If they are revenants, let my imagination flow. Maybe it is like, you know, those mandala in religious paintings. So maybe it is something like that. Doesn't make them sacred, but it's maybe something like that. Their space. I don't know who constructed it, but it's their space.
I want to know more about the importance of the titles, how she intended them to work, and if we take away the title, what is going to happen?
Well, you know, this PowerPoint was without titles, and Jacqueline thankfully added them and the dates. I think it's really important. No, of course the titles are important. They are. Marlene Dumas, I have to say, she writes incredibly well, and she's an incredible writer, and there's volumes of her writings which is just incredible. So the titles are super important, like all her writings. They're really, really, really important. And maybe I would say it's not an explanation, it's not an interpretation, the titles, it's something more. Again, they are in their own space and their own time, and they add a space and time to the one of the figure.
So if there's no other question, I think I can thank, on behalf of everyone, Elisabeth Lebovici
for this for being there.
Illuminating lecture, demanding, but I take this word as a compliment.